Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. NATO Secretary General says a missile attack which killed 2 people in Poland was not a deliberate attack. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke with President Xi Jinping about China meddling in Canada's affairs. And this is Métis Week. Lethbridge College celebrated with a special flag raising. Plus, we hear from a Métis artist about why this time of year is so very special for him.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The head of NATO and Poland's president say there are no indications that a missile which came down in Polish farmland that killed 2 people was a deliberate attack. They claim it is likely that Ukraine launched the Soviet-era projectile to counter a Russian air assault.
This is not Ukraine's fault. Russia bears ultimate responsibility as it continues its illegal war against Ukraine. In the meeting today, NATO allies offered their deepest condolences on the tragic loss of life. They expressed their strong solidarity with our valued ally Poland and made clear that we will continue to support Ukraine in its right to self-defense. Russia must stop this senseless war.
Russian retreats have been hasty throughout the war, with troops leaving equipment and encampments behind for Ukrainian fighters to collect and deploy. China's President Xi Jinping has accused Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of harming diplomatic relations by sharing information about their meetings with the media. Xi confronted Trudeau about the issue during the G20 summit in Indonesia. Trudeau reiterated that Canada believes in a free and open dialogue.
In Canada, we believe in free and open and frank dialogue, and that is what we will continue to have. We will continue to look to work constructively together, but there will be things we will disagree on, and we will have to.
Let's create the conditions first.
The Chinese government regularly issues editorial guidelines for its media, highlighting topics that cannot be covered or only reported on in a very certain way. Prime Minister Trudeau says he also discussed with Chinese President Xi about the issue of China meddling in Canada's affairs.
I also highlighted things of preoccupations to Canadians, like the question of interference with our citizens, and highlighted that it's important that we be able to have dialogue about this. But part of our values as Canadians is being open and frank about the conversations we have, keeping Canadians involved and apprised of what it is that we're doing and the conversations we're having here, and that's exactly what I did.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says Canadians are having a very difficult time right now making ends meet. During question period at the House of Commons, he once again asked for the Trudeau Liberals to axe the carbon tax.
The minister should talk to the people who live in rural Canada today. Those people are faced with $3 a litre diesel just to fill up their trucks. Similar fuel to heat homes in places like Northern Ontario and Atlantic Canada will cost families as much as $6,000 to get through the winter. The costly coalition of the NDP and Liberals have as their solution to triple the carbon tax that those families will pay. Canadians are worried about keeping the heat on. Will the government cancel the tax so that they can do so? Thank you.
Let's talk about the other elements of his plan. He wants to eviscerate the EI system that so many Canadians depend on. He wants to endanger seniors' pensions. He wants to make polluting free again.
That's terrible.
He wants to claw back climate checks from Canadian families. He wants to deprive Canadian children of dental care, and he wants to deprive low-income renters of the support they desperately need.
Leighton Gray is a lawyer who has represented a number of people who have fought both COVID-19 fines and vaccine mandates. He also represented a couple of Alberta pastors who were jailed for breaking those COVID-19 mandates. Now, when it comes to Alberta government releasing Dr. Deena Hinshaw of her duties as Chief Medical Officer of Health, he says it was foreseeable since Hinshaw set up a medical dictatorship during the pandemic.
Instead, they declared a Public Health Act emergency, which essentially set up a medical dictatorship. And I mean that literally. The wording of the statute says that Dina Hinshaw, the Chief Medical Officer of Health, could use any means necessary to fight the pandemic. So when she was asked about these orders, she did something that was rather surprising and very, very significant in terms of the case and the law in Alberta. She said that these were not really her orders, that she was really just the messenger or the transcriber, and that she was going to then Premier Kenney and Cabinet to seek instructions about what to put in those orders.
Make sure you catch the full interview with lawyer Leighton Gray and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. Well, we saw some light snow in parts of southwestern Alberta again today. Jeanette Rocher is here now with an early peek of the forecast. Jeanette, we may even see some flurries developing tonight.
Yeah, more flurries this evening, Hal, but they should clear up before morning, leaving partly cloudy skies and a northwest wind gusting from 30 to 50 kilometers per hour. And to Thursday, mainly clear skies, but only a high of -10, which is chilly enough, but you add that wind chill to it, we're going to be feeling more like -22. So it's going to be a chilly one on Thursday, but the good news is that's the worst of it. After that, the days are going to warm up significantly. I'm talking plus temperatures. I'll be back later on in the show to let you know all those details.
Looking forward to that. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Premier Daniel Smith doled out a variety of mandate letters to various Alberta ministers. The letters outline the actions the province will take to create jobs and to ensure that Alberta's economy will continue to grow and diversify. Infrastructure Minister and Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf joins us now via Zoom to talk about his mandate letter. Nathan, you say for your department, construction is key?
We're just focusing on the importance of construction and that relationship with the provincial government. We want to highlight that as a high priority within our government, make sure we're building that relationship, building our communications, working on some of the challenging issues that we faced over the past few years with the entire global economy, and working hard to build that relationship where we're getting high quality construction projects done in a good time that's mutually beneficial on both sides of that contract and that arrangement.
Now, what about the province potentially helping with a big capital project like maybe a third bridge for Lethbridge?
That's still going through the capital process. We're not quite there at that point yet. I think I'm mostly focused on making sure that the announcement, the projects that are already on the books get completed well, get started well. Some are transitioning from design to sod turning, shovels in the ground. We want to make sure those can move forward properly. We want to make sure projects that are nearing completion that have seen some cost challenges, escalation over the past year or so with the high rate of inflation, we want to finish those projects well. Yes, we also want to look forward to projects, and we're working through the prioritization of that capital plan with other ministries, education, advanced education, health, municipal affairs, and of course, finance and treasury board.
One of the biggest projects for our region, of course, is the new Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center opening early next year. What will that event center really mean for our region?
I look forward to that huge economic boost for Lethbridge and area, that huge support for our agricultural sector. And it's a beautiful building. If people haven't gone by recently, they should go by and see that entire west wall with all the glass and just the great architectural development that's going on there.
Thanks so much, Nathan. That was Alberta Infrastructure Minister and Deputy Premier Nathan Neudorf. Now, construction of the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center continues. Mike Workington, CEO of Lethbridge and District Exhibition, says the fall weather allowed workers to really get ahead on the project. Workington offers an update as to some of the newest items being built inside of the facility.
It is nice and toasty warm on the inside, which allows a lot of work to be done on the inside. A lot of our slabs are now poured throughout the building and in the majority of the rentable spaces, with the exception of the trade halls. And the Roost Acoustic guys are hard at work drywalling in our admin spaces as well as our meeting room spaces currently. In terms of the overall schedule, we still now we're at the point where we're into winter, so we're hoping for a warm and long spring.
Workington says they still expect a spring 2023 opening. He added that bookings for the venue have already begun for next year. Alberta's Education Minister, Adriana LaGrange, says the province will make more mental health support available for students. LaGrange says up to $40 million over the next 2 years will be going to programs to help students in kindergarten through grade 6.
We will now be able to support close to 60 mental health pilot projects in K-12 schools across this province. These projects will take a collaborative and innovative approach to improving student mental health through counseling, social and emotional learning, student assessment, family and parent-orientated supports, and training for school staff.
Well, it was a very special moment at Lethbridge College as the Métis flag was raised. Staff and students from the college took part in Métis Celebration Day on Wednesday morning. Video journalist Micah Quinn took in the festivities and chatted with a local Métis artist who had his artwork on display to showcase the Métis people and their way of life.
I've been doing this style of artwork for a lot of years. I've been developing it probably over the last 30 years.
Carl Jerome creates intricate pieces of Métis art and has been tanning animal hides for years. He says his biggest inspiration is to continue to bring awareness of the Métis culture.
I get people contacting me from all over the world, interested in my art. I mean, and obviously they're not Métis, but they're interested in Indigenous art.
The Métis flag ascended to the top at Lethbridge College as well, and Brittany Lee, the Indigenous Services Academic Advisor and Recruiter at the post-secondary, says that according to numbers from 2021, over 40% of Indigenous students on campus self-identify as Métis.
For them to come here and feel like it's home is very important for them to feel connected to their culture still and to feel like they've got a place here.
Lee also explained the significance behind the infinity symbol on the Métis flag.
The two ends coming together represents two different cultures coming together to make one new nation.
You can't mark Métis Celebration Day without mentioning Louis Riel, a Métis leader and founder of Manitoba who has remained controversial depending on who you ask. He was executed for high treason for his role in the 1885 resistance to Canadian encroachment on Métis lands. Riel was initially dismissed as a rebel by historians from Canada, but many now see him as a Métis leader who fought to protect his people from the Canadian government.
He was one of our heroes that we really helped gather us together and fight for our rights so that we could have the freedoms that we have today in celebrating our culture.
This is also the first time in history that Lethbridge College has hosted Métis Celebration Day. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The president of the Lethbridge Police Association says the road will be long to rebuild the community's trust following what's become known as the Memegate scandal. LPA President Jay McMillan says it's very important to know that the members of the Lethbridge Police Service hold each other to a higher standard and have a responsibility to police themselves. He says the decision made by the presiding officer to dismiss Sergeant Jason Moulton, who's a 24-year member of the service, is the result of one set of circumstances and should not be reflective of the sergeant's overall character or of the police service as a whole.
The decision is what it is, and we respect the decision and we respect the process. And as police, we know that we're held to a higher standard and that we should be, and that there's an accountability in our profession, the likes of which doesn't exist in most other professions. We acknowledge that, we welcome it, we respect it. Regarding the decision itself for Sergeant Moulton, I want to emphasize that that's a decision made as an assessment of one man's conduct or behavior in a particular set of circumstances. And it's not a commentary on 20 years of previous exemplary service. It's not an assessment of the man's character. It's a determination of a misconduct in one particular set of circumstances. The circumstances, the result of which are just sad for everyone.
Sergeant Moulton's disciplinary hearing wrapped up on Monday with the presiding officer handing out a sanction to dismiss Moulton from the LPS. Moulton has 30 days to appeal to the Law Enforcement Review Board. 1 in 3 Canadian kids cannot afford the cost of enrolling in an organized sport. That's according to Kidsport Canada, a charity that provides grants so families can afford to send their kids to a season of their favorite sport. The Lethbridge and Taber branch of the charity recently received a $70,000 donation from a local home builder. Del Matthews with Strandville Living explains how his company was able to raise the funds.
We picked a house and we picked a lot in a community and went out to our vendors and asked them to participate. and by donation of materials and or labor, and with all of those proceeds being donated to Kidsport Lethbridge Tabor.
The $70,000 will go a long way. Over the last few years, we haven't been able to run our golf tournament. We did our first golf tournament after 2 years just this summer. So doing a fundraiser during COVID is not something that didn't go over very well. So this will help, and because of COVID as well, families are actually in more need. So even though we weren't able to fundraise, this has been very generous to help us kickstart being able to pay for children to play sports come 2023.
The Lethbridge and Tabor branch of Kidsport hopes to help around 500 families over the next year. Thanks to a $5,000 donation from a Lethbridge pharmacist, the cost of tuition is becoming slightly more affordable for 5 lucky students at Victoria Park High School. Vijal Sukadia, owner of the medicine shop, says he paid for his education through low-interest loans, and he wanted to help the next generation of students. The recipients of the scholarship sent him letters, which he says were very emotional.
One kid, she wrote in a letter that nobody even passed the high school in all her family. Like, she will be the one going into the undergraduate in entire family. With the help of the scholarship.
Since the moment that Vishal from the medicine shop reached out, it has been a difference maker. I think it has given us hope for some of our students who would otherwise not be able to afford to even begin the idea of planning for post-secondary, whether post-secondary includes the college or different programs within the trades or the university.
King says the donation will help students to finally realize their dreams. Wonderful to see. Manitoba Premier Heather Stefanson gave her government speech from the throne. One of the items highlighted was the need to fight crime and address the homeless issue in Manitoba.
To make neighborhoods across the province safer, we will support law enforcement with training, new technology, and additional officers. At the same time, we will work relentlessly to improve circumstances of homelessness, addictions, and mental health challenges in our communities by supporting 1,000 addictions treatment spaces. We will launch the largest investment in generations in our healthcare facilities here in Winnipeg, a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar commitment. To go alongside the over $800 million in capital investments we have already committed to across the province.
The Canadian Union of Public Employees, representing 55,000 Ontario education workers, filed a 5-day strike notice. The union says bargaining talks with the province broke down yet again.
We hope they would recognize the urgency of our workers' plea when we held our historic strike vote. We hoped that they would respond to last week's show of parent and worker solidarity. I've been disappointed at every turn by a government that categorically refuses to invest in our schools and prioritize our students. I'm so proud of my coworkers for doing the hard thing and for standing up for what is right.
Government officials say they're disappointed at the strike notice, saying the province has put forward multiple improved offers, which were all shot down. Despite a series of legal probes and an underwhelming midterm showing by many Republicans, former U.S. President Donald Trump announced a third run for presidency. He promised to supporters that he will make America glorious once again.
We always have known that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of our fight to rescue the American dream. In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. This will not be my campaign. This will be our campaign all together.
It should be very colorful with Trump in the race once again. Well, it was a cooler day here in southwestern Alberta with light flurries in Lethbridge, but fortunately the white stuff will be ending soon. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. Well, we saw some snow again in parts of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, not only could we see a few more flurries, but also some wind gusts, making things a little chillier.
Yes, that's true, Hal. We have to be mindful of that wind chill because it's going to make a -10 day feel more like a -22 day. That will be our Thursday, but the good news is that's the chilliest day out of the next 7 days. After that, it's just going to warm up more and more. -1 the high on Friday, all the way up to 3 on Saturday, and it's just going to get warmer from there. Sunday's high 4 degrees, and then up to 9 for both Monday and Tuesday. I'll definitely take it, considering the average high for this time of year is between 4 and -8. So we're going to be higher than that next week. Looking forward to that. 19 was our high temperature on this day back in 1943, and it was a cold, cold, cold -31 in 1959. I guess we can be thankful that we are not quite there. 7:45, that's when the sun woke up this morning. Sunset this evening at 4:48 p.m., giving us just a little over 9 hours of daylight. Okay, on the West Coast tomorrow, looking at sunshine in Victoria, 8 degrees the high, 9 degrees the high in Vancouver with a 20k wind, -6 the high in Edmonton, -8 in Calgary. Both of those cities looking at mainly sunny skies with a mix of sun and cloud later on in the afternoon and a 15-kilometer-per-hour wind, making it feel a little bit chillier than those minus temperatures that we're seeing there. -12 the high in Saskatoon, Regina sitting at -11 tomorrow, and -6 the high in Winnipeg. All of those cities looking at local blowing snow with light periods of snow in both Regina and Winnipeg. Winnipeg seeing some blowing snow on the outskirts of town as well. Toronto looking at flurries in the morning, flurries in the afternoon, 2 degrees the high, -2 the high in Ottawa with some flurries there as well. Montreal sitting at 1 degree with partly cloudy skies. As we move over to Atlantic Canada, 2 degrees the high in Fredericton, looking at clear flurries as well. Mix of sun and cloud in Halifax, 5 degrees the high there. Charlottetown looking at showers and flurries, 5 the high there, also 5 degrees expected to be the high in St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow. And they are looking at 20 millimeters of rainfall as well as some 80-kilometer-per-hour wind gusts. It's going to be a rainy, windy one in St. John's tomorrow. There you go. That is your weather forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Loblaw says a combination of various viruses led to record sales of cough and cold medication this fall at both its Shoppers Drug Mart and Pharmaprix stores. Company officials say the manufacturers of multinational and generic brands have had trouble keeping up with the spike in demand. President Galen Weston says retailers have been left with limited stock for some medications, and it's difficult to say when the shortages will actually end. He said the company also recorded sustained growth in prescription medication sales this fall. Restaurant Brands International, the company which owns both Tim Hortons and Burger King, says former Domino's Pizza CEO Patrick Doyle has been named as executive chair. Doyle's appointment comes as the company focuses on boosting sales and its stock price amid economic headwinds. Doyle says the chains owned by RBI are exceptional brands with real opportunities for growth. He takes over from Daniel Schwartz and Alex Behring, who are co-chairs and will continue to serve on the company's board of directors. A host of celebrities, including Larry David and Tom Brady, have been named as defendants in a class action lawsuit against cryptocurrency exchange FTX. The suit argues that their celebrity status made them culpable for promoting the firm's failed business model. FTX has been in the public eye for more than a week after the third largest cryptocurrency exchange ended up with billions of dollars worth of losses and had to seek bankruptcy protection. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 36 points on the day to finish at 19,957. The Dow was down 39 points to 33,553. The S&P 500 was down 32 on the day to 3958, and the Nasdaq was down 174 points to 11,183. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.33 to $85.59 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 17 cents to $6.20 US. Gold was down 9 cents to $17.7378 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $21.48 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.79 per bushel, barley's at $9.71, canola's at $20.22, and corn is at $11.55 per bushel. Live cattle were at 53 cents to $151.80, Feeder cattle January contract was up 45 cents to 177.48, and lean hogs were up 25 cents to 85.58. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 75.04 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta's Education Minister Adriana LaGrange says the province will make more mental health support available for students. LaGrange says up to $40 million over the next 2 years will be allocated to around 60 programs to help students in kindergarten through grade 6 here in Alberta. Coming up, an insightful interview with a lawyer who represented a number of Canadians who were either arrested or fined for not following COVID-19 mandates in our country. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, there isn't a single Albertan or person anywhere, really, who can say that their lives weren't affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It has changed a lot about the way that we interact with one another, what we perceive to be public health, and for many, it's changed our perception of political power versus civic responsibilities and rights. So joining me today is attorney Leighton Gray, who has been instrumental in ensuring government and corporate entities are held accountable for the pandemic measures that cost Albertans so much. He joins me now. Thank you so much for coming on today, Leighton. Great to have you here.
Well, thanks for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to talk to your viewers.
Okay, so now before we get into details about Justice Grant Dunlop's recent declaration, tell me a little bit about the cases that you've been fielding since the pandemic started.
Well, there have been quite a few, and it's kind of morphed through different stages. In the early part, we spent a lot of time fighting COVID tickets, and we had a series of high-profile cases involving, for example, Pastor James Coates in Edmonton. Many of your viewers will remember the triple barricading of the Grace Life Church that was occupied by RCMP, turned into a barracks. So we represented him. We also represented Timothy Stevens, a Calgary pastor who was jailed and who was fully acquitted. And we also represented hundreds of people in Manitoba, British Columbia, the Yukon Northwest Territories who faced these COVID tickets and quarantine tickets. But more recently, our firm has become very involved in fighting vaccine mandates involving large employers, many of whom are government regulated, including CN, CP, Canada Post, Purolator, ATCO, and others. The big case that I've been working on with Jeffrey Rath, who's a lawyer in Calgary, is on behalf of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. It's a case called Ingram. And Ingram is probably the most significant constitutional case, and perhaps the most important civil litigation case that is before the Court of King's Bench in Alberta right now, because the result in that case will impact many, many others. And we've been working on that case since December of 2020. And right now, we're just awaiting a decision in that case from Madam Justice Romaine, who has been the assigned trial judge.
Okay, and I understand that you had the opportunity to question Dr. Dina Hinshaw on a couple of occasions. So what came of those testimonies? What information was presented there?
Well, there were a number of things that came out, but the most shocking thing and the most important thing for the purposes of our discussion today is that when myself and Jeff, when we questioned Dr. Hinshaw about her orders, she surprisingly disavowed ownership of them, which is surprising because when the governor of Alberta declared the emergency, they did not declare a public emergency in the sense that every single arm of government would have a say in what went on, and nor would there be any oversight by the legislature. And instead, they declared a Public Health Act emergency, which essentially set up a medical dictatorship. And I mean that literally. The wording of the statute says that Dina Hinshaw, the Chief Medical Officer of Health, could use any means necessary to fight the pandemic. So when she was asked about these orders, she did something that was rather surprising. and very, very significant in terms of the case and the law in Alberta. She said that these were not really her orders, that she was really just the messenger or the transcriber, and that she was going to then Premier Kenney and cabinet to seek instructions about what to put in those orders, so that they were not her orders. She was just an unelected official, and that these orders actually represented the will of the elected officials, the Alberta government. That was quite surprising. And of course, we found out, we argued in Ingram, we have argued in Ingram that was actually illegal. It was outside of our authority to do that. And then, of course, in another case, in the CM case, Mr. Justice Dunlop said precisely that.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned that. So maybe tell us a little bit about the Ingram case and how that differs from the CM versus Alberta case that Justice Dunlop is hearing.
Well, the Ingram case is broader in scope than the CM one, but ultimately they dovetail to the same legal result. In the Ingram case, Rebecca Ingram is a lady, she's a gym owner in Calgary, and she is like many Albertans. She had her business shut down due to COVID-19 lockdowns. Jeff Rath represents her. I represent some churches through the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, whose religious liberties were infringed. And so we alleged in the Ingram case both violation of certain charter rights, including life, liberty, and security of the person, and also freedom of religion. And we said that these lockdown orders, that they were a violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and therefore illegal, and that they should be struck down. We also argued that the way that the orders were made under the Public Health Act was illegal because it exceeded the authority of Dr. Dina Hinshaw. And we say that because under the Public Health Act, the whole point of declaring a Public Health Act emergency, and incidentally, there was no prior precedent for a province-wide Public Health Act emergency. Normally, these are local in nature. But the whole purpose of that was to set up somebody who was a medical expert to make these decisions and to formulate these orders. And so it defeated the very purpose of a Public Health Act emergency to have a scenario set up in which the so-called medical expert, Dr. Hinshaw, was going to lay people like the Premier and the Cabinet to get instructions about what to put in health orders. And our suspicion is that the reason why this was done is that Premier Kenney and the government set up Dr. Hinshaw as a straw person who would sort of take the slings and arrows of public scorn, and that they could sort of pull the strings behind the scenes, and that Dr. Hinshaw would ultimately be the one whose names went on the orders. The orders themselves, the wording of them was, I, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Chief Medical Officer of Health, hereby order. It was so that part of it was very clear, but the part that your viewers need to understand is that in law, this is very significant. Dr. Hinshaw was not permitted under the Public Health Act to delegate the authority over the making of those orders. She had to make those herself. And as I said, the whole idea of her going to the Premier and Cabinet, it defeated the entire purpose. And as Mr. Justice Dunlop in the CM case found, it was fundamentally illegal. So flash forward to the CM case, which was heard earlier, actually a few months ago, and the decision came out recently. The CM case was brought by a group of parents who were concerned about another health order that was made by Dr. Hinshaw back in February of this year, which removed masking in schools. Your viewers will remember this. This is during the period when the then government of Alberta was gradually removing the COVID lockdown restrictions, coming out of the Freedom Convoy, the truckers convoy. So what these parents complained about was that they actually said that they argued that the charter rights, that the life and liberty and security of the person of their children was being violated by this order removing the masking, because it exposed them to a heightened risk of being infected or suffering serious consequences as a result of the COVID-19 virus. They also, in that case, claimed, as we did in Ingram, that Dr. Hinshaw had exceeded her authority under the Public Health Act. Well, Mr. Justice Dunlop, in a very well-reasoned decision, dismissed the idea. He said there was no evidence that there was a charter violation, that these children were exposed to an increased risk of COVID-19. However, he did say that under the Public Health Act, it was improper and illegal for Dr. Hinshaw to go to the Premier and Cabinet to get instructions about what to put in these orders. And in that case, in the evidence, very shockingly, and some of your viewers may have heard about this, we heard about a PowerPoint presentation that Dr. Hinshaw actually gave to the Premier and Cabinet about what their different options about what they could do in terms of removing restrictions. And there was sort of a Goldilocks and the Three Bears type of scenario where, we could let it rip and remove all the restrictions, or we could keep everybody locked down, or there'd be this graduated removal of them. And of course, we all know what transpired in the aftermath. But that PowerPoint presentation is very clear and cogent, uncontroverted evidence of this relationship, where Dr. Hinshaw was going to Premier and Cabinet seeking instructions about what to put in these orders. But under the Public Health Act, that simply is not permitted. So the import of this is very significant for Ingram, because when the Dunlop decision came out, the decision in CM, we immediately contacted the court in the Ingram case and said, well, these two situations are really very, very similar. In fact, they're indistinguishable in law. And we think that Justice Dunlop's decision binds you, and that therefore we ought to win in Ingram. In other words, that the court in Ingram should come to the same conclusion, because whether restrictions are being removed or whether they're being imposed, the same process in terms of the formation of these health orders was being followed by Dr. Hinshaw and the Alberta government. And so we have made submissions, as did the Alberta government, to the court, and we're waiting the court's decision right now. That decision is going to have very, very significant impact upon Albertans, because if we are successful in Ingram, that would mean that every single one of Dr. Hinshaw's orders, all those lockdown orders, were illegal. And of course, I think your viewers can put together and connect the dots in terms of the significance of that when you consider all of the businesses that were closed and everything else.
It seems very important and something that could have massive impacts into a lot of other civil cases.
Oh yes, and there are many. I believe there are hundreds of cases that are awaiting the result in Ingram. Many of them COVID tickets and the like. But there are many people, as you know, lost their livelihoods over these lockdown orders, and so there is great potential for significant civil liability against the province over these lockdowns, and it's all turning upon this Ingram decision. So we'll wait and see. We're waiting with bated breath. We're looking forward to the result, but I honestly did not know how it's possible for the court in Ingram to sidestep or avoid the reasoning of Mr. Justice Dunlop. As I've laid it out, the cases are really, they both turn on the same legal issue. And as your viewers may be aware, there's a principle called stare decisis, which means that our courts are expected to decide similar cases in similar fashion. That's how we have, consistency in our law. Otherwise, we'd have chaos. We have cases all over the place. And so judges tend to be deferential towards decisions that are made in similar cases by judges at the same level of court. In this case, both of these decisions, CM and Ingram, are in the Court of King's Bench, which is the highest trial court in Alberta.
Fascinating stuff. Now, Leighton, I know you've been involved in a lot of employment cases, as well as being intimately aware with the details of Pastor Tim Stevens' case. You mentioned that, of course, at the beginning of the interview. So he's, of course, the Calgary pastor who was jailed for 21 days in March for holding church services and has recently been acquitted of all charges. So what should all Albertans and Canadians be aware of in these important matters?
Well, the Stevens case is a great lesson in that, he stood out of the crowd. He stood up for what he believed in. And I don't say this to be critical of other Albertans. I understand why many people were afraid and confused and didn't really know how to react to this incredible government overreach. But I think when we look back retrospectively in hindsight upon, how certain people, very brave people, dealt with this government encroachment upon rights and freedoms. I think there's a lot to be learned there, and I hope that that Albertans will look upon people like Timothy Stevens and Pastor Coates and Archer Pulaski and Chris Scott and people like that, and be encouraged, and encouraged in the sense, in the true sense of the word. And in other words, to take courage from what other people have done by stepping out of the crowd. It's understandable, it's human nature just to go along, to get along. And in Canada, by and large, we've been very well governed for a very long time. But I think it's important for every Albertan and really every Canadian to begin to question that, because I think COVID-19 is a shining exception to the overall excellent government that Canadians have enjoyed throughout our lifetimes. COVID-19 is a very, very dark period. And I'm one who advocates very strongly for a full public inquiry into the way that governments handle the COVID-19 inquiry. And I think this is very important. For example, as you know, some people are calling for a general amnesty. But I think before we can get to that point, I think we've got to ask some very serious questions about how and why things were done. And I think that everyday Albertans and Canadians have to have the opportunity to come forward and tell their stories. I think this is extremely important in terms of healing some of the damage that was done. And so I think the best thing that could come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, if we're indeed out of it, is to have a full public inquiry into the who, what, where, when, why, and how, so that we can fully document that and learn from it. And that might result in certain people being held responsible, but I don't think that's the most important thing. I think the most important thing is to document what occurred and then chart a course forward to learn from the mistakes that were made, because as we all know, there were many.
We are about out of time here, but thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, Leighton. Appreciate having you on.
It's my great pleasure. Enjoy your day.
That was attorney Leighton Gray of Alberta. You can find out more by checking out his firm's website or by following his podcast, Gray Matter, available online.
Now that school is back in session, it's also time for colds and flus. We're also hearing a lot on social media about children missing classes due to illness. Well, we wanted a healthy and holistic balance to this conversation. And as with everything, health starts with family at home. We wanted to cut through all the political science and connect with a health expert to learn more about healthy homes, healthy families, and what is the root cause for the number of sick children being reported right now. For this, Josie Bosgra of Roots and Fruits Wellness joins us to shed some light on family health. Josie, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for having me.
Josie, we're hearing on social media that there is an increased number of sick children getting into hospitals right now. I got to ask you, are you hearing the same thing from moms and dads that you know?
Yes and no. I would say yes. It does seem to appear that there are more kids sick than usual this year, and that is true. I think in part that is due to the fact that a lot of kids weren't exposed to viral infections in the past few years. They're wearing masks, which can weaken the immune system. Largely, isolated, not enjoying like the typical things they do. So maybe like feeling a little down, and that all contributes to their overall health. So yes, I do think there is a larger amount, but I also think it's really normal at this time of year. There's always kind of an uptick in illnesses. The days are shorter. We're not getting as much sunlight. And when we are, we're like totally bundled up. So our skin isn't absorbing the vitamin D, which affects our immune system. What else? We're typically more sedentary, so we're not sweating as much. Our kids aren't like running around outside as much. The other interesting thing is most of the sugary holidays all in these winter months, and excess sugar can affect our immune system. And so with the kind of usual uptick plus the reality of the effects of COVID on these kids, yes, I think there is more than usual.
Gotcha. I think that for me personally, you mentioned something really important. It's the vitamin D from the sun. And we'll get into that that's probably part of the toolbox for parents. But do you think that there's something that parents can do around the house to limit exposure to maybe bacteria and viruses?
Yeah, there are definitely ways to support your children and your family's immune system, yours too. And we can talk about this, but I think the first thing to mention is I think we got to kind of bust through the fear of getting sick. Getting sick is actually good for us. Of course, in moderation. If we're getting sick like every few weeks, there's probably something up. But being exposed to viruses is good to build our kids' immune systems. And not every virus they're exposed to is going to give them symptoms. But when it does, I think we have to just embrace that. I think because of COVID, our response has been, oh my gosh, a symptom. I got to run and get a test kit. Something's wrong. But actually, your body's working if you're sick, right? Your immune system's fighting and you're building antibodies. And so, not to focus so much on, like, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to get my kids sick. Just to kind of accept it as a good thing. But of course, there are things we can do to prevent illness. It's kind of basic, like rest, hydration, good food. I think one huge factor for the whole family is gut health. Over 70% of the immune system is housed in the human gut. And so when an individual's gut is imbalanced or a mess, so to speak, they're probably going to get sick when exposed to something. And so you can do that with your kids. I mean, eating a wholesome diet is a great place to start. You don't need all the fancy supplements and regimes for your kids to have a healthy gut. A lot of it is just diet. In terms of supplements, probiotics, that's one thing for the whole family that can help keep your gut healthy and keep your immune system a little stronger. A good quality probiotic to keep the bacteria in your gut balanced. Yeah, I'm sure there's so much more I could say, but I'll leave it there.
Oh, there's so much information, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. I think that just like our muscle system and our skeletal system, the immune system is also one of those parts of the body that, in my opinion, we can probably either disregard or enhance. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so disregarding and enhancing are a great way to put it. I think of things a lot about food because that's my scope is nutrition. And so disregarding or enhancing, I mean, every bite we take can either harm or heal our gut, which is really largely our immune system. And I think it's one of those things that's easy to forget about the impact of things that we do. So it's easy at Thanksgiving to like eat a little bit too much sugar, let our kids eat a little bit too much. And then Halloween is another one. Your kids can eat candy without it like totally destroying your immune system, but it's all in that moderation. And so, like you said, I think we have to regard it, not disregard it. We have to be aware of the effects of things on our immune system. Another big thing is how we're cleaning our home, the non-food items that we're consuming through our breath and on our skin at home, that affects our kids' immune systems. And all of this also affects our immune systems. We're obviously talking about kids, but this can be applied to adults as well. So regarding your immune system, and your words would be also acknowledging that some disinfectant type cleaners can actually cause more harm than help. And so, of course, if you've got sickness in the house, you want to keep things clean. But how are you cleaning your house? Are you using things that are completely wiping out your bacteria? And good bacteria helps your immune system. It helps you. It helps your gut health be in balance. And when that is in balance, then you're going to get sick more. And it's easy to disregard the immune system, especially in today's hyper sanitized day and age after the pandemic years.
It's definitely a hyper sanitized situation that we find ourselves in. And as you were talking about the food, I was thinking about that old and apt saying of let food be thy medicine. That hasn't changed from however long ago, 1,500 years ago or 1,000 years ago that statement came up. Could you give us like a top 5 inexpensive food list that a parent could get for their children that would help them?
So you probably have a lot of the ingredients in your house already. That's kind of the beauty of healing with food is it's pretty basic. I mean, keep the bones that you had from your chicken last night and make some broth and let your kids sip on that throughout the day, whether they're sick or not. That's going to be great for them and for you. I mean, truthfully, I have a 5-month-old baby and he drinks bone broth. And it's nourishing his gut, building his immune system, and we drink it too. And that's literally just from the bones from dinner. So I think that's super easy. So that would be number one. Lots of herbs and spices you might already have, like some anti-inflammatory ones, turmeric, ginger. You can like make really yummy drinks, elixirs we call them, which are like medicinal hot drinks, and you sweeten it with honey or maple syrup, and your kids will probably love it. It's sweet, it's delicious, and it has all these anti-inflammatory, gut healing stuff. So turmeric, ginger, cinnamon. Those are three that most people have in their pantry. Thirdly, I would say like more in the herb section. Elderberries is a good thing to kind of have in your cabinet for this season. But again, you don't need to wait till they're sick to give it to them. So that's another good one. And then just like lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. And I get that times are hard with finances, so it can be tricky. But where you're able to, buying organic, fresh fruits and vegetables is better because there's less like chemical toxicity that you're going to be taking in. Usually, a lot of our conventional vegetables and whatnot are depleted of minerals, depleted of vitamins, they're genetically modified. So even if someone's eating super healthy, they might still be super depleted, and that's going to show up in the immune system. So the fifth one I would say is just an abundance of like fresh fruits and vegetables. If you really want to go for it, seasonal ones and local ones would be great. And we have farms in the area you can go pick stuff up, different stores that have local veggies. So yeah.
That's great. I know in our home, we've got the elderberry syrup, the olive leaf extract, minerals and vitamins. I realize that's not always practical for people, but growing up, I know we wasn't quite force-fed bone broth, but that was a staple in our parents' toolkit for surviving at home. Just quickly, we only have a few minutes left. I want to ask you about cleaners, because what we put on our skin, and whether we're using it to clean ourselves or cleaning our appliances or things around us, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, most conventional disinfectant type of cleaners, as I said earlier, can actually just damage our immune systems more than we think. And more than our immune systems, it just damages our cells in general. The levels of toxicity that we're seeing in our bodies it's unsustainable. And so, wiping out all the good bacteria is not something we want to do. And there's ways to clean and disinfect without doing that. So I use a lot of like essential oil type cleaners. Locally here in Lethbridge, we have Purple Carrot, which is great because they have a huge refillery. So you could bring in your old Windex bottle, clean it out, and then make that switch. It's pretty cheap because you're refilling it in bulk to something that is made with like vinegar and essential oils, not these like really heavy, harsh cleaners that give you a headache immediately. If you feel the effects of that, you got to wonder like, what's that doing deep down? So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but I would just say moving away from that. And one really good tip, because it's not always financially reasonable to just switch everything. When you run out of something, then go replace that one thing with something a little bit more natural. And then next time you run out of the next thing, then you just keep switching over and over.
Yeah, little bits at a time. And that's right. The old saying of you eat an elephant one piece at a time. And certainly people have to watch their budgets. But what price do we put on ourselves and our health? And where do we want to go with that? I feel like when one goes to the doctor, for example, we were talking about children having to go see MDs, we're looking for health. But in my opinion, the doctor has his computer program and is actually looking for dis-ease. I feel like we sometimes look for opposite things. Do you see that more families are maybe looking for alternatives to keep their families healthy?
Yeah, and if they're not already, they might have to soon because, we have this Tylenol shortage, which has other implications that I've read about. But there's going to be a point where people are going to look for alternatives, whether that's, oh, I'm realizing that this medication I'm giving my kid has long-term side effects and I don't want to do that. What are my options? So I think, yes, lots of people are. The COVID times were something that kind of drew people's attention to their health. And so we saw a lot more people interested in natural health. But yeah, and I think on the note of Tylenol, like there's lots of other great remedies that are way safer for babies, for infants, for kids, for yourself. Homeopathic remedies would be a great alternative to pharmaceuticals. They're generally really safe for even infants. So that's a great kind of part of your toolkit for your home, is having a plethora of homeopathic remedies. There's kind of one out there for everything. So that's great. And then again, just nutrition. If you eat well, like, health really does start in the kitchen. Exercise is really important. Sunshine is really important. All these things are really important. But if you're eating like garbage, chances are you're not gonna feel great, no matter what else you're doing.
Right. So one of the things that I've got to ask you, because personal testimony, that social proof is always so important. How did you get into holistic health?
Yeah, I got into it. I guess the crux of my story had to do with competitive figure skating and seeing the power of nutrition on my performance. And then through that, I kind of just got obsessed with learning about nutrition and reading science and hearing, again, personal testimonies and trying things out, like kind of trial and error, and seeing like, wow, this is amazing. And once I cleaned up my diet for other reasons, which were sport related, I didn't get sick as much. Funny enough. So yeah, that's kind of my personal testimony. And I have many stories of seeing the power of it, in my life in the past 10, 15 years. But yeah.
Well, that's great. And I know from my previous television production experience of getting to know the Blades hockey organization, the years that they had their best runs in standings and the highest number of players that went on to the professional level was when the team really buckled down on their diet and health. And, that was what the coaching staff and their nutritionists had told me. So I really appreciate your input, and just talking about how your figure skating improved just by changing your diet. And we don't realize how much of a bedrock that good food is.
Yeah, 100%.
I really appreciate you being here, Josie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And for all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Michael Clausen. Thank you for watching.